you choose not to ask about this in the interview, I think that's a little lax of employees going to an interview. So, good point. Ask about it. Put pressure on your employer.
Well, that's, of course, you don't really want to put a prospective employer under too much pressure. Toby Simpson, CEO of Gulf Recruitment Group, is in the studio. And Toby, what do you think? How tough can you get with potential employers when you're going to an interview?
Well, if we're asking about that specific question, do I ask about your record of paying gratuity when you in an interview? I would say absolutely not. Daft idea. The principal reason is that, number one, trust the Ministry of Labour. The Ministry of Labour has a really good set of laws that are enforceable, and they have a very good arbitration system that is accessible to everybody. It's not hard. It doesn't take thousands of dirhams in lawyers' fees to get this done. And they are generally on the side of the employee. Very, very fair. It's also very rare. I did a kind of a poll of 17 of our kind of highly experienced gnarled consultants yesterday, and basically none of them could really come up with too many examples.
You mean apart from 6 years ago when the downturn happened?
You got mass redundancies there, and there were some disputes, absolutely, and there were some companies that couldn't pay. I think a lot of it is to do, when I asked my 17 null consultants, it was to do with the sort of employers we tend to work with. But there are definitely examples, as you quite rightly pointed out, and I spoke to a friend yesterday who this actually happened to very recently. And he told me about the process. It was very simple. He went down to the Ministry of Labour. He engaged their arbitration panel. The dispute was about the employer was trying to get the individual to to cancel their visa before they'd received the dues, and that's a big no-no, because effectively, as soon as you've signed your cancellation papers, it's basically tantamount to saying that all affairs are settled between myself and the employer. But he'd gone down there. He registered his complaint with the Ministry of Labour, which was a very efficient process. The Ministry of Labour contacted the employer, and within a week or a couple of weeks, it was sorted.
I
Trust
guess
the Ministry of Labour.
That's the case with an existing company. But if your company goes bust, it should still have your end of service benefits ring-fenced somewhere. But you think going for an interview and asking whether or not the funds for end of service benefits are ring-fenced is too cheeky?
I do, yes. I do, because you should trust the Ministry of Labour. But also, it's the wrong message to give when you're in an interview. One of the things that you need to remember is interviews are an emotional process. It is not a question of a simple verification of skills. It is not a cold, hard, logical process either from the employer or the employee. For the employee, the job hunting process is it is emotional, because you wrap so much of your personal self, your self-esteem in what you do, in who you are. So it becomes emotional about your next role. And for an employer, it's very often that they'll make the company they work for plays a big part in their life. They associate themselves very closely with that company. So it becomes an emotional process. It's very much like dating. It's romance. So if you think about going into these sort of interviews, you've done a wonderful job talking about painting the picture of how you're going to create corporate rainbows together and skip hand in hand through the financial markets, and then to say at the end of it, but when I leave, how much are you going to pay me, is just kind of painting the wrong picture. It's like going on a date and starting to talk about, but when we divorce, can I have the house and kids type thing. It's not it's not right. Trust in the authorities, and it's also a relatively rare occurrence. So I know it is a significant part of the package, but you will get paid. Trust in the MOL.
Yeah, I mean, there are people in this building who have been, shafted to the tune of several 100,000 dirhams when leaving an employer in the downturn, because the employer had gone bust. There was no money there. Ministry of Labour or whoever it may be can't do anything if your employer has gone bust and that money hasn't been ring-fenced. So when is the appropriate time to raise benefits? Because I do take your point that in a job interview, if you're interviewing somebody and all they do is ask about what's my housing allowance, how many days holiday do I get, how many days do I get for Eid, what happens when I leave and my gratuity, if that's all they're interested in, it does send the wrong message that these people are only in it for the benefits rather than to do great work together. And yet they're important questions. I'm a father of 2 kids. I have to ask these questions. I need to know about these things. Because if for no other reason, then my wife, when I get back from the job interview, will be saying, what about the housing allowance? What about the school fees? What about the gratuity? Or whatever it may be. So if the interview isn't the appropriate time to ask these important questions, when is the appropriate time?
I suppose you can speak to your finance department. Look, you cannot mitigate against circumstances such as an enormous global financial downturn. But most companies, because they're not going to get their audit signed off unless they have an accrual on their balance sheet for their staff provisions. It has to be there, and an auditor would query why it's not there if it was. Now that's very different from having let's say recognising a liability on your balance sheet to actually reserving capital specifically against that, as you would under pension regulations. Is a different matter. I think most companies would look at it and certainly reserve 2/3 of their potential gratuity liabilities, and this is obviously because if someone resigns, they're due 1/3 of their gratuity benefits, whereas if they're released, they're due in their entirety. So it's kind of sensible to look at a reserving policy of 2/3 of your total liabilities. There is no regulation to force companies to do that, but I would say it's good practice.
Now, we've got a text in this morning, and that comes from, if I can just dig this one out, it's from Ray, who says that he doesn't think you should trust the MENA because in the event of a dispute, it will just get transferred to the Dubai courts, which means a lot of legal expense. It's all very well if the company agrees and has the money to pay, but if they don't want to pay that or haven't got the money, then it will just go to the courts. Very true. It can definitely go to the courts if the company don't pay or can't pay at all. But actually, the courts, if the Ministry of Labour make an arbitration, they make a judgment during their arbitration, that is taken very seriously by the courts. So normally these things are not protracted and drawn out too long. Obviously, any form of court dispute doesn't happen overnight. But yes, the Ministry of Labour can certainly help speed up those affairs.
Lots and lots of SMSs about this. Many of them are really quite detailed on human resources and labour law here in the UAE. Toby's a recruitment specialist rather than a lawyer. Maybe we should get a lawyer in, because clearly it's touched a nerve and people do have questions. So we'll get a lawyer in to answer some of the very, very detailed ones. Maddy writes in with a very interesting point, though, on do's and don'ts in an interview. He says, I agree with, and many people don't agree with you, Toby, I'll say that, but Maddy writes in saying, I'm in agreement with Toby as a recruiter. If I get asked about the end of service benefit, it rings an alarm bell and would put me off. So if we talk about the interview process, we know that recruitment is picking up. Lots of people are going to be in job interviews over the next 3 or 4 months or so. Some of the do's and don'ts, particularly the do's, the best practice in interviews. What do recruitment consultants like you want to hear, the kind of questions they want potential recruitees to be asking in the pre-interview and then in the interview itself? What do you really like to hear, and what do employers really like to hear?
I think we really like to hear that the individual is very much engaged in whatever task or challenge that the employer has for them. When we hire someone, we're tending to hire them because we want to achieve a certain strategic objective. So if the individual is asking very bland questions like, where am I going to be sitting, that's not really painting the right sort of picture about their mindset. So they should be talking about, where's the business going, where are the challenges up ahead, what do you see me doing what would you like me to achieve in the first 6 months of being there. Very open questions, showing that the individual is engaged in the task in hand and keen to come in and make a difference.
Etna Trainer has texted in saying Mike Bloomberg used to say that he wouldn't hire anyone who asked about holidays in his first interview, as he felt they were more concerned about the time they spent away from work. Which may be true. But Roger texts in, surely, gents, any half-decent company would expect a potential employee to have existing commitments and want details of a remuneration as soon as possible. How else can you make an informed decision? And I guess it's right that if you ask about end-of-service benefits, if you stay 1 or 2 years, it doesn't make any difference about your end-of-service benefits. Maybe that indicates, in fact, that you're intending to be there for a long time and could be a loyal employee.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, kind of. It's whether we can take it for granted or
Can
not.
I get
It's
you
the
to say
law.
you should
so
ask this
if you
question?
get an employment contract, your employment contract that is signed and ratified, it becomes the law. So you don't challenge too much that's there in front of you in black and white. It is the law here that you have to follow the gratuity rules, and they're very clear. There are only very few circumstances that an employer would be allowed to not pay gratuity, and that's whether they have a pension scheme or another benefit scheme that is actually greater than the total benefits that would be gained from end of service benefit, or if they breach contract or break the law or assault a fellow employee. Only in very few circumstances would they not be able to pay those benefits.
So in terms of the best practice, because unless you star in an interview, you're not going to get hired anyway, so the end of service benefits are irrelevant. You've
Quite
got,
right, yes.
You've got to get hired. And to make sure you do get hired, you talked about some of the things that we should be doing in interviews, asking open and informed and intelligent questions. To what extent do people do this? It's common sense, I guess, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's common practice. You see an awful lot of people, an awful lot of candidates. What's the caliber, generally speaking, would you say, of interview technique among the people you say?
It's extraordinary. You can have fantastic interviewees who are 24 years old, and you can have guys that have not really interviewed before, and they're kind of towards retirement age. So I suppose there is a process, but people who go into it believing it's a two-way conversation, believing that have been in business meetings before and structure it in those ways, those are the guys who tend to do well. A lot of it is common sense. It's interpersonal skills.
Now, we heard about the war for talent, not the war of talent, but the war for talent, a few years ago when prices were rising and everybody wanted the best people and people job hopping all over the place. Now, as we get to a period of growth again, steady growth, companies are wanting to retain people and to attract the best. And more companies are actually giving end-of-service benefits that are in excess of the labour law to try and attract and retain people. Are you seeing much of that?
We have seen a few instances where there are pension schemes that are given to employees in the UAE, and that's not common at all. And those pension schemes can exceed the total value of the of end of service benefit. And I think that's a very good move. It's a very promising move. The flip side to that is when you have a benefit like that that's very long term but has a significant cost to the employer. Actually, when you're hiring an employee, it's still a shame to say that the individuals look at the bottom line number first. What's my salary? So if you're spending $5,000, $10,000 a month on pension contributions, often to get the guy through the door, it's easier to stick that on the top end. But you're entirely right about the war for talent. The interesting phenomenon is I saw this back in kind of 2001 when we had a downturn before. What happens is back then we had kind of 3 years of no graduate schemes, of no kind of typical large employers such as the accountancy firms, the management consulting firms, the large FMCGs and industrial firms taking on graduates. So all of a sudden, as you had this sudden upturn in the economy again 3 years later, you did not have the supply of individuals reaching a kind of a management level. So you had this incredible paucity of talent at a time where you have the greatest demand. And if you look at what's just happened now, we've had a very long downturn. We've had pretty much 5 years of very little engagement of graduates, of youth coming into the workforce. So as a result, now you have that lack of talent, at a kind of a mid-management stage now, and it will become very, very competitive. And that's something we at the Gulf Recruitment Group have been thinking about a lot, about how to engage the best talent that it does exist on the market, but also how can employers kind of broaden their search and still maintain the results they're looking for in terms of the talent they're acquiring.
So many SMSs on this. Thank you very much indeed for all of them. One in particular I like, and maybe we'll make this the final word. Why wouldn't companies hold 2 interviews with the boss? You have the positive work discussion. I loved your phrase, was it about painting corporate rainbows? That can be the conversation with the boss about strategy. And a second interview with the HR department, which is a little bit more functional about things like benefits and working hours and where will my chair be in the office and will I get a view of Burj Khalifa?
I think I'd like to end with a dose of cynicism from Garland, who says, so what if you do ask? The company says, yes, we have your end of service benefits safeguarded. Are you going to ask to see the company financial records to confirm it, they could be lying and you'd never know. So in that sense, perhaps best not ask. So Toby Simpson strongly recommends that you don't ask about the safeguarding of end-of-service benefits. Toby, thank you very much indeed for coming, and we really do appreciate your time. CEO of Gulf Recruitment Group. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys. My
Thanks
pleasure.
very much.